up times I least expect. Thoughts and words and deeds, or in a sermon I forget. Trying not to take it all for granted, haven't yet. Who'd have thought we'd be without regret? And I know sometimes I can't recall exactly what was said. The simple phrase that I said to a dear friend. And I hope you know I cherish all the years and time we spent. And you know that I still miss you in the world that we have shared. And I'm sure you know I wish you all the best of life ahead. And that you'll still be here with me in the end. See each other as often as we've guessed. Life being the way it is, who has time for friends? When we are together it feels like no time has passed. We can pick up right there where we left. And I know sometimes amidst it all I falter and forget. Simple phrase that I said to a dear friend. And I hope you know I cherish all the years and times we spent. And you know that I still miss you in the world that we have shared. And I'm sure you know I wish you all the best of life ahead. And that you'll still be here with me in the end. No, I won't forget you and all the times we've had. Maybe someday soon I will see you again. If we don't, you're in my heart and I'm in yours, I bet. A simple phrase that I said to a friend. I'll do my best to see you. I'll do my best to see you. I'll do my best to see you, dear friend. And I hope you know I cherish all the years and times we spent. And you know that I still miss you in the world that we have shared. And I'm sure you know I wish you all the best of life ahead. And that you'll still be here with me in the end. What am I without the song that's in my heart? Well, it would be as if my soul had come apart. Like a fool that's running day to day with no place I'm running towards. Lost in circumstance and cause. Well, there is purpose, there is patience, there is so much more inside. If we just can't find the rhythm, there's no need for it to hide. And if we can us free. And my eyes cannot believe what they have seen. A beauty so enchanted neath its shiny outer seams. A love that bellows deep within my veins. In time to renew a love for all of you. Well, there is purpose, there is patience, there is so much more inside. If we just can't find the rhythm, there's no need for it to hide. And if we can all discover what is missing in our dreams, will we ever feel the river? Will we ever touch the sky? Why in all this do I yearn for other worlds? We can finally find the truth to set us free. I believe in all the truth that I have seen. Wonderful and terrible and beautiful and lonely. In this we'll discover very soon. All we really need to find the love and truth to set us free. There is purpose, there is patience, there is so much more inside. If we just can't find the rhythm, there's no need for it to hide. And if we can all discover what is missing in our dreams, the truth will set us free. Truth will set us free. The truth will set us free. Looking around at all the leaves as they're falling down. It's my favorite time of year. A tale of woe as old as time itself would let us know. Is all that I can seem to hear. We all go and disappear for a time, to hide and recluse, to renew and revive. This is how the story goes. To reach inside and find a tiny spark that's so divine. Oh, something that is truly mine. This is how it's always been. Snow is coming down and covers all that we knew. It's the way it's always been. For a time you wonder where the ground is gone and where we all went wrong. And our time just slips away in the cold. Oh, this is how the story goes. To reach inside and find a tiny spark that's so divine. Oh, something that is truly mine. It's here for everyone. how you just can't wait to share the love that you have found. It's the love you hold within. We return all revived and renewed. It's time to sing a song to everyone with love from me to you. Oh, this is how the story goes. Reach inside and find a tiny spark that's so divine.
We acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe peoples on whose traditional territory we are meeting. On stage with me to answer your questions are, starting at the end, Jane Holmes, Deputy Chief Administrative Officer of Infrastructure, Development and Enterprise Services, Trevor Lee, Deputy CAO of Corporate Services, Tara Baker, the City's Treasurer and General Manager of Finance, Colleen Clack-Bush, the Deputy CAO for Public Services, and finally is Future Ready. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items tonight before we jump into the question and answer and a brief presentation to start things off from Tara. Tonight we are here to answer your questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to invite you to start asking our panelists your budget questions in a few ways, and you can choose whichever way works best for you. You can use the Vimeo chat if you're tuning in that way, the Facebook 831-7340. And a tip that I can offer to help us along and for those that are posing questions. The team here is very knowledgeable about Guelph's budget, but that budget is nuanced, it's complex. Our focus tonight is not necessarily on specific dollar amounts, but more on the how and why. It's about how this budget was approached, built, and presented, and in a way that addresses the challenges and the opportunities that we face together. Again, start to send in those questions at any time so that we're ready to go once Tara finishes her intro. We will try and get to all of your questions tonight, but any questions that we can't get to in the next hour or so, we'll share our responses on our website at guelph.ca/budget under the Get Involved section. Now, without further ado, I'll pass it over to Tara, who will give a brief overview of the 2022 and 2023 budget and what was presented to Council on November 16th. Tara?
Great. Thanks, Stephen. So as you said, we presented our very first multi-year budget to Council on November the 16th, and we're really proud of this financial policy milestone. Multi-year budget means that the city is making decisions now with a view beyond one budget year. And this improves our transparency and communication ability with the community and with Council. And it provides us a framework also to be able to phase in the budget pressures and impacts that one given year. It also allows us to respond to our businesses in terms of some consistency for their business planning. We've heard that they would like us to be able to, with more confidence, project out the costs from a business perspective. the reason we can now do a multi-year budget is because we have a strategic plan. Our strategic plan was approved by council, and it's our guide and our roadmap for everything that we do. And the strategic plan was developed based on a community plan. And the community plan was built listening to the community extensively. And so when you think about our budget, the community voice is front and center as it was built and developed. And so the other thing in terms of the community impact on this budget too is that as council's doing policy decisions through the year, there's extensive opportunity to hear and be impactful on all decisions, and those are the decisions that roll into the budget that's been prepared. In terms of the budget, it's really a reflection of the cost to deliver the services that, as a city, we provide to the community. And those services are, the things like when you turn your water on, you have clean water, the garbage and recycling collection on your curbside, all the way through to the parks and the amenities that you use at the recreation centers, and our emergency services teams that respond when you're in need. And so we think about the budget as really the compilation of the cost and to deliver all those services. And so when we think about those services too, the budget's developed in two main pieces. And that is that the city delivers some of those services, as I just mentioned, but we also have local boards and agencies that deliver some of those services, like our police services and library services, for example. And so when council's deliberating on the budget, they're considering the impacts of both of those two parts of the budget. And then this year, we do have a third piece of the budget as well that council's considering, and that is a special levy for the Guelph General Hospital, and their commitment, council's commitment to for capital enhancements over a 6-year period. In terms of the budget development as well, we, as a staff, as we're pulling together the budget, we think about it in three categories, and those are the services and the impacts of service delivery to deliver to our current population, our current community, and our current businesses. We also then have to think about the impacts to delivering our services to a growing community. So the province has required us to grow to over 200,000 people over the next 30 years. And there's costs that come with growth. And so we need to make sure that our services can accommodate the capacity in people and businesses. And then lastly, our budget looks at service enhancement. So we've heard from council and the community that there's things that this city needs. And so in those cases, we're looking at service enhancements like trail connectivity and our transit expansion and enhancement, as well as the investment in community agencies and community investment that council had considered over the last week. So really the budget, when you think about the three pieces, taking care of what we own and all the infrastructure that we use to deliver those services now, how to maintain that with a growing population, and then enhancing the services. Those are the three pieces that council is considering, and it's really an art in terms of how to balance all those pressures with the lens of affordability as well. And so really, that's in summary how the budget is pulled together, and there's a difficult decision before council to hear all of the different pressures and needs and make the right decisions for our community.
Great. Thanks so much, Tara, for that overview. It sets a nice foundation for the discussion, hopefully for folks that are tuning in, and again, get ready to send your questions in. So we are going to move into that question and answer period of the town hall at this point. I'm going to thank everyone in advance for sending in their questions. And again, if you haven't done so, there's still lots of time. You can do it throughout tonight's event in our town hall. And so if things pop in your head, please do make sure you log in and ask those questions. Again, you can drop those questions into the Vimeo chat, if that's where you're tuning into, on the Facebook page in the comments section. Or again, you can text or call us. And again, I'll read that number again. That number is 519-831-7340. All right, and with that, let's get started. So I'm going to start our first question off to the panel with Mr. Stewart. Scott, we're going to start with you. And this question is, how can a multi-year budget cover 2023 when, as some of you probably well know, and this question astutely asks, there's an election in 2022? So we'll have new councillors by then, but they'll have no say necessarily in what budget is for their first year. So Scott, do you want to maybe tackle that question?
Sure. Stephen, so thank you for whoever sent that in. I love the question because it highlights a couple of things for me, but I'm going to tell you it's the wrong way to see it. We have got to move past planning just at the edge of our nose. You heard our Chief Financial Officer just talk to us about our planning horizons. They're in 5-year increments up to 30 years. So we can no longer afford just to think about what's going to happen next year. But here's the advantage that anybody running for council will be able to jump in and be fully informed, because our strategic plan is, and it's this document, Guelph Future Ready. If you haven't read it, it is riveting work. Get on our website and take a look at it. But it's connected to the multi-year budget. And what that does is that says council has approved it because we did all kinds of engagement with the community through our community plan. So it's our community's priorities, and who can be running for council without sort of contemplating what our community priorities are? That's the beauty of it. And we'll move from this section now as 2-year budgets to a 4-year budget, because that does a number of things both for residents and our business community. It helps us phase in revenue shortages, or helps us phase in new revenues. It deals with taxation over time so that edges can be taken off it. You can think about the future. It's no longer okay to build facilities and not think about 5 years from now or 3 years from now when they open them, and there's operating costs. So now you get to sort of have a look at these things, eyes wide open, and say, yes, I'm fully comfortable committing both capital dollars and operating dollars. So that alignment, that long-range view is exactly where, we all work somewhere likely, and that long-range view that all businesses take, why would we be any different? Now, we bring some other things to the table, community building and some social work that has to take place, but we take the long view on how to run this business. We're a multi-million dollar operation, and we shouldn't treat it any other way. Your tax dollars are so important to you. They're equally important to us in council and any future member of council. These documents make it easier for future councillors to jump in and have a great handle on our future. So thank you for that question, because it highlights where we need to go, not where we've been.
Thanks, Scott. That's great. Tara, I'm going to come to you next. And this question is, I think, something that's pressing for a lot of folks, and I think we all understand and recognize that, and it has to do with housing and affordability in general. So the question is, housing prices in Guelph are getting higher, and tax increases add to the struggle that some people are facing in that regard. Why is the city considering a tax increase while people are struggling from the pandemic? We've seen a lot of themes and questions in this regard online, but Tara, maybe you want to jump in and tackle that one.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. So it is a really important question. And, we absolutely know that there's been a lot of challenge and people are feeling the impacts from the pandemic. That's absolutely, is something that we're aware of and the council's aware of. I would say that in terms of a municipality and the services we provide, those are critical services that have to keep being delivered. Even through emergency periods and economic uncertainty periods like we're going through, and we think about like the things that I just mentioned: clean water and garbage collection and our emergency services and all of those pieces that come together. The city's also trying to manage through all of those same pressures that the community is, and not only that, I would say that. our investment, when you think about the impact in the community, is creating jobs, and it's creating some of that stimulus that's needed as we come out of this situation. And so I think that altogether, as we've used in this budget, we absolutely understand that impact. We're investing in social services, and we're investing in the community through our budget. And I would say when you pull that all together, we're also utilizing the tools that we can to reduce that impact wherever possible. And so in this budget, we've used our reserves much more than we have in the past to try and reduce that impact wherever we can, but by still investing in those critical services that the community, especially vulnerable populations, really rely on.
Great, thanks, Tara. That's comprehensive. That's great. You talked a little bit about this, Tara, and I'll come back to you for this question. You talked a little bit about the beginning about how the community plan has really informed the work that the city does writ large, and that was done in consultation with the community. Scott alluded to it, and you did as well, about the strategic plan and the importance of that tool in really being sort of the guide for council's direction and where the city is going to be going. And in line with that, there's a lot of consultation that obviously went through those things. So I'm wondering if you can answer this question. How was the community consulted when this budget was developed?
Sure. So just kind of thinking back to the way that the council operates and the city operates is that we take decisions to council through the year. Programs like the Guelph Trails Master Plan, for example. There's a number of these policy decisions and different other types of master plans as well. And at all of those council meetings, the community engages on those files. And we listen, and council sets policy based on that need. And then thinking back all the way to the community plan as well as the strategic plan, and all of the engagement that happened at that point, the budget is just the tool or the resource to fund all of those plans and those policies that have been made to date. And so when we think about the budget, it's not recreating the wheel. It's the point now that the council's setting the resource strategy and the tool to fund those decisions and making a choice about pace in terms of balancing all the different pressures.
Yeah, and just speaking from my own experience, I mean, there's a lot of ways that the community is consulted on this budget, and there's a lot of ways that they input into this budget. Just last week, we had what I thought was a really good, solid group in terms of numbers, but also the questions that were asked come out to delegate to council. And so that's a way that people get a chance to inform the budget and let their elected officials know that here's the things that are important for them. Colleen, I'm going to come to you on this next question. This is around affordable housing. It's a big conversation topic that we've seen for those that were paying attention to the recent federal election in September. It was a topic of conversation for that level. I think we all know that multiple levels of government play a role, but maybe you can answer this question. Where does affordable housing fit into this budget? What is the city doing to help people experiencing homelessness?
Sure. So yeah, that's a great question, and obviously a key focus for many in the community. And when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about housing that is often below market rent, so that people are able to access it who may be struggling. It's about getting people who are living in homelessness off the street and into housing. And so we really look at housing as a continuum, and sort of that the supportive and affordable housing that we often hear talked about is that sort of starting point on the continuum where we're trying to get people who are experiencing homelessness into housing, sometimes through the supportive housing model where there's services provided, and other times into affordable housing units where the rent may be subsidized because they're just trying to get into housing, and then eventually moving through the continuum into other types of housing. But when we look at housing sort of through the social services lens, it's important to remember that we have a relationship with the County of Wellington, and the County of Wellington is actually our service provider when it comes to housing in this community. And so that's an existing relationship that we have. And so we through our budget, provide in excess of $22 million to the County of Wellington every year, and they in turn are responsible by the province mandates that they are responsible for housing, social housing. So that comprises about $17 million of that budget that goes to the County of Wellington. And so that's a really important nuance, because that's a significant amount of money that's coming from the Guelph tax base through our budget, and that is being flowed directly into social housing. It just happens to be managed by our colleagues at the County of Wellington. In addition to that, City Council has set affordable housing projects as a priority, and so in this budget, there's $500,000 in the base budget set aside to support affordable housing projects, and that's on top of money that had previously been put into our affordable housing reserve over the past few years, and we just recently awarded money out of that reserve. So in 2021, money was awarded to the Welcome Drop-In Centre for their affordable housing project, that's known as Grace Gardens. That's on Woolwich Street, and then again to the Wyndham Youth Shelter for some youth supportive housing. So those are some really tangible ways that Council approved funding directly going to some really meaningful and impactful affordable housing projects here in the city. And then again in this budget, that money is set aside to go into the reserve, and we will again with our partners at the County of Wellington be putting out another RFP early in 2022 for projects that are seeking additional funding for affordable housing. But ultimately, there's a really, really broad continuum of social service issues that the county and the city are working on, because ultimately assisting those people who are experiencing homelessness, getting into housing, is obviously a key priority. As you mentioned, it's something that we certainly hear the federal and the provincial government speak a lot about, and oftentimes the money that we as a municipality provide to these projects can in fact be seed money to access other investments from other levels of government. So there's lots of different ways that it's supported, and so certainly are eager to continue doing that in the coming years as we continue to make that a priority to get people into housing.
Great, thanks, Colleen. The next question I'm going to go to is probably one for a little bit of both, perhaps Trevor and Tara. And it's around, and I think if members of the community have been on guelph.ca/budget, they'll see that the budget is broken into pillars. They'll see that there is, building our future, working together for our future, et cetera, et cetera. And this is about the working together for our future pillar, and specifically, what kind of things does that address, and how does that necessarily get to supporting the strategic plan and the goals of the strategic plan? So I know, for example, that that area focuses on attracting employees. It focuses on designing services that are digital and easy for people to access. It talks about some of the things that you talked about, Tara, when we started off with respect to strong strategic financial plans and documents that guide the city's decision. But maybe you can help in answering that question, and I'll read it again. It's in regards to the working together for our future, and how that working together for our future pillar supports the development of the budget and is informed by those strategies that we talked about. So I'll turn it to Trevor. Yeah, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Stephen, and good evening, everyone. It's my first opportunity to address you. So this particular pillar, I think, is interesting when we overlay it over the time in which we struck our 5 pillars of our strategic plan. It was before the pandemic's hit, but the pandemic really highlighted for us the importance of this particular pillar in the focusing of our customer service. 20 months ago, we transitioned to a highly digital method of delivering services across our community, and we also worked to move digitally and remotely, as did everyone. And it focused on the ability for us to embrace technology and modernization of our services. For us to continue to operate in the previous fashion, it would have been not unsustainable going forward. So this particular pillar, created and struck before the pandemic, was highlighted on its need for us to transition and change. And we did so quite rapidly. During this particular year we're in right now, 2021, we made use of some additional funding from the province to advance our digital and modernization work. And we are going to see that even flourish even more so in our 2022 and 2023 budgets to really understand and do our very best to meet the customer's experience expectations. Customer service is one term. I quite like customer experience. Everyone should have an experience with any point of interactions with us as a city. So having customer service being primary is the focus of this particular pillar, attracting and retaining the talented staff that we have that deliver these services and are committed to the public service that they offer in all of our lines of business across the city, not only at City Hall, but every single satellite location that the City of Guelph operates and delivers. We want your experiences to be consistent, and that's a focus we're going to be putting a lot more emphasis on in this particular budget year. And then focusing on long-term sustainable financial strategies. Our Treasurer Tara Baker highlighted that the presentation that we gave to Council and the comments and questions that were raised during delegation night really were talking about the predictability and affordability and the ability for individuals and businesses to plan for their future. What better way than to give them ultimately we will be delivering a 4-year operating tax-supported and capital budget for our community. But right now we're delivering a 2-year with a 2-year forecast. So we're laying out very clearly what we anticipate 22 and 23 with our budget delivery itself and what our forecasted 24 and 25 would look like. Council will reconvene in 23, and that will be the focus for them on the next 4-year budget cycle for a multi-year budget. And maybe I'll turn it over to our Treasurer, Tara, if there's anything that she'd like to add to that question. Thank you.
Sure. So thanks, Trevor. The only other thing I would add is that pillar beyond digital and customer service also captures, like Stephen had said, the financial, the long-term financial plan, as well as the human resource and the focus on our people. And I think that throughout the pandemic and everything in the services that I mentioned, our people are a great asset. And so the budget reflects that compensation and our people are critical in terms of the service delivery. And the strategic plan sets goals and expectations towards that as well.
Great. Thanks to you both. We're not leaving Jane out for any reason. So this one's coming to you next, Jane, and it's around business and supporting business. Your service area plays a big role, economic development, tourism, and you're delivering services through your team to help the community in that regard. So this question is, how is the city supporting small businesses through the pandemic? And I think we would all say that it's gone on a lot longer than we probably wanted, hoped for, anticipated. We do see a lot of fluctuations in cases with respect to COVID-19, but I know that your team has been playing a role in supporting businesses throughout the city, and so maybe you can share a little bit about how you're doing that.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen, and good evening, everybody. So our Economic Development Department, of course, is very interested in making sure that our businesses get through the pandemic. As we know, with the pandemic, everything keeps changing all the time. Who knew it was going to last this long? The rules are changing all the time on how our business can engage with their customers. So it's important that we remain flexible and also listen to our businesses to see what their actual needs are, because their needs are not going to be the same as what they have been in the past. A couple of things that we are working on is that as part of the budget is that we have included a budget item to assist businesses with business development. And that really means funding those companies who can, or those outside organizations that can really help some of our businesses thrive. A lot of our, what we have seen in the last few months is that there have been a lot of people who have gone into business for themselves, a lot of new businesses starting up. So we need a way of being able to support those to make sure that they are successful. Other things that we've included in our budget, of course, is the ongoing seasonal patio program. We are very excited to let everybody know that in the new year we're going to be delivering our economic development strategy and for economic and for tourism. And that will help us as we go forward. The lessons learned that we've seen in the past few months through the pandemic really has helped us chart a path forward on how things are going to look going forward into the future. Because as we said, it's not going to be the same as what we've had in the past. Other things that are coming forward in the next year are going to be the municipal accommodation tax report. I know that people are interested in seeing that. That will help us inspire us to get more tourism into Guelph. And then also we're very excited about our partnership with 10C and the Guelph Farmers Market. So that will help us in the downtown. We'll activate that market more than just on the weekends, but all week long, bringing customers and businesses into the downtown. So we have other initiatives that we are working on. Guelph Shops is one of them. We are continuing to work on getting grants that will also help us support those businesses as well. So, and with lots on the go in terms of right now, we have a fairly small economic development department, but very engaged and very interested, Stephen, in making sure that they're successful going forward after the pandemic.
Yeah, a small and mighty economic development team, and I think that strategy that you talked about, the economic development and tourism strategy, is something to watch for as well. Colleen, I'm going to come to you next. Transit is a big topic in this budget. Transit is a big topic, I think, every year at budget, and I know council is very interested because I know that the community is very interested in transit, and we've got a lot of riders that use Guelph Transit, to get to work, to get to places of play, to get around the city. So the question that we got through Vimeo was, I know transit is already highly subsidized, but it's still unaffordable for some. And if we want more people to ride the buses, the system needs to be better and cost needs to be part of the incentive. Is the city investing more to make it cheaper and easier to ride the bus? And I know there's a big report that landed a couple weeks ago, so I'm sure you'll share some information about that.
Sure. So yeah, thanks for the question. So transit's obviously a really key part of a lot of the strategies that we have here when we look at things in our strategic plan related to active transportation, some of our climate change goals where we want to get more cars off the road. Getting people using transit is a huge priority for us, but part of that is also making the transit system an option that's appealing to people. So there's kind of two parts to that question. So on the affordability side of things, recognizing that for some people the cost of transit is an impediment, we do have our Affordable Bus Pass program, and so certainly encourage people to check that out through the city's website, because we do have that Affordable Bus Pass for people who qualify under certain low-income measures, and that's an opportunity that council approved a number of years ago to make sure that more people are able to access our transit services. Certainly work that we have ongoing in the coming years is a transit fare strategy, and so that's also going to look at all of our transit fares. We've just recently renewed our UPass agreement, for example, with students associations at the University of Guelph, which is also a really important component because university students comprise a fairly significant portion of our ridership. But it's also really important that we have a transit system that services the whole city. It's not just about servicing the university, although that's an important part. And so as Stephen, you mentioned, we did just have our transit route review report come to council last week, and that really lays out the roadmap for transit services in the next 7 years, and that includes electrification of our fleet, because we know that's going to be a really important key component about meeting those climate change targets, but it's also about changing up the routes. So historically, Guelph's transit system has operated more on a spoke and hub kind of model, where there was a central transit terminal and all the routes came into it. And what is being proposed is more of a grid-like system that you've probably see in larger cities, where it's more convenient for people, so you're not feeling like you're going as far out of your way on the bus to get to your destination. There will be better connections and better travel routes. I think a good example is Speedvale Avenue, where, if I'm remembering correctly, we have 5 different transit routes that operate on Speedvale Avenue. Eventually we want to get to where we have a single bus that goes back and forth east and west across Speedvale and makes that a much more convenient route. So that's all part of what council's considering at budget deliberations next week. They approved in principle the sort of plan that transit staff brought forward after considerable review with the community and having our transit planning staff map out what the next number of years could look like. But it really is about improving that transit system so that people can navigate inside of Guelph effectively, and also connect with transit that, for example, as we look to things like two-way all-day go, we need to make sure that people can ride Guelph Transit to then get on the train and travel to other communities. So it's all part of that broader plan, and certainly we'll be looking forward to Council's deliberations on that next week. And then just the last thing I'll mention is there is another initiative that was brought forward by Council back on that affordable bus pass about having a tiered program for that affordable bus pass. So again, something that Council is going to be considering next week, and that all speaks to that affordability question. But ultimately, our goal is to get more people using transit and make it affordable and accessible to as many people as possible.
Great, thanks, Colleen. And yeah, I mean, I think it highlights how these things are so interconnected, right? Climate change and transit, you mentioned that somewhat, and I'm sure we'll probably get some questions about how the city might tackle climate change as a challenge, but these pieces all fit together, and it's actually kind of a nice time at budget to see and look at it as a whole and how these things connect. If folks have been on guelph.ca/budget, they've seen that there's a capital forecast, there's a capital plan for projects, so you can kind of get a sense of when major capital projects are coming over a time horizon. Jane, this next question I'll send to you, and it's around that capital forecast and that 10-year capital forecast. So there's a lot of projects in that forecast. It's as Tara alluded to when we started off, it's a growing city. There's more being added to it all the time, and it's obviously a task to manage that and be smart in managing that. So the question here is, and perhaps you can answer it, is there's a lot of capital projects, as I said, in that 10-year forecast. How do you manage or change the budget with such a long-term outlook to 10 years, for example? And is inflation part of those contingency plans or the way that we think about that forecast?
Thank you, Stephen. So the great thing about Guelph is actually that we have so many large, exciting projects that are coming up, and it's really important to try and plan for those the best way that you can with the best information that you have at the time. As you're planning out large projects out into the future, the farther out it is, the less certainty you have on what the scope of the work of the project is and all the different elements that have to be included that you would incorporate into your costing. So what we try to do is that for projects that are forecasted every year, the great part about doing multi-year budgeting is that every year you have an opportunity to revisit that project as it gets closer and closer to your construction timeline. And when you know more, and you do better. So as we get closer to the project, there's more information that will inform those projects as it gets closer. But in the meantime, as you can probably imagine, we're all feeling it, is that there's lots of volatility in the market with various elements. Sometimes it's certain products, whether it be lumber, as we saw in the summer, which seems to have settled down now, or structural steel that seems to be, the prices for that seem to be rising now. So how do you account for those? I mean, we would never have been able to imagine that we would be in a situation that we are now, trying to tender these big projects in a pandemic where you've got that kind of volatility in the pricing and also supply chain issues as well for materials. So you do the best you can as we are looking forward to the projects that are coming up in the forecast in the next few years. We have included for inflation probably a little more than what we normally would have. We don't want to overinflate the costs in the future because we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're overestimating how much we're going to need. But we need to be realistic about the projects that we are doing and what they might cost when they get there. So to answer the specific question, Stephen, is that yes, we take inflation into account. We take a look at those every year, and as we get closer, we're able to get more targeted costing. And actually, the best time to get good costing is right before you go out for tender, because you know what you're building, you know how you're building it, and you have a better idea of the conditions upon which you're building it. The most vulnerable projects that we have right now are not necessarily the future projects, but the projects that we are just starting to build that we had budgeted 4 years ago. So those ones we are trying to do mitigation just to make sure that as we go out to the market, we're well positioned to be able to manage any overruns that might come in.
Great, thanks, Jane. Yeah, and the commentary around inflation I don't think is lost on anyone, whether you're going to a grocery store or you've had a project around the house, or in our case, it's affecting multi-million-dollar projects. I think it's a very real comment, and it's something that I think we can all relate to. Scott, I'm going to come to you next on a question here, and it's kind of actually tied somewhat to that discussion around large, complex capital projects. The city has a tiering system for those complex capital projects. I think everyone in the community will be aware of what some of those are. Obviously, Baker District we've talked about. I think South End Community Centre has been discussed pretty openly in the community, and folks are aware of that. The Guelph Police Services headquarter, for example, is another one. So some time ago, the city put in more rigorous project management processes. So the question here is, how are those more rigorous project management practices being used to finish buildings like the police headquarters, or other projects for that matter? In some of these cases, and perhaps it's also related to what Jane was speaking about in terms of inflation and such, but some of these are running over budget. Some of them have taken some time. And so I'm wondering if you can share some information about that and some more insight, and then perhaps also with sort of an eye forward, what is that thinking or that awareness or the learnings we've taken from things like that and the context of the world we're in now, what does that mean for future projects like that South End Community Centre as an example?
Great, thanks Stephen, and thanks for that question, folks. So what happened to that rigorous process? It's in place. We're absolutely running our bigger projects. We call them Tier 1 projects. You take a look on our website, you'll see them. I haven't looked today, I believe there's 7 of them there. And what has happened, and I'm going to come to Guelph Police Services headquarters, because that's the reason where we are now. It's caught that in advance. So I want to say it's good work that took place. There was some rigor put in place from years ago. That was Deloitte came in, did a review. We now have a corporate project management office that has oversight on these larger projects, these complex, as you said, Stephen. Complex doesn't always mean dollars. There's other things, other factors that go in place. And here's a large one. So, there happens to be one that's an issue, and I'm going to speak to that in about 10 seconds. But if you look at the other ones, Wilson Street reconstruction parkade, on time, on budget, moved on. There's no issues there. Baker District, we've moved through it, and we're at that stage of moving through, and there's lots of activity there now because it's happening because of all that good rigor behind the scenes. Our Operation Campus is going through that same rigor. Our Food Future Tier 1 project, they've nailed it. So that rigorous work has taken place. What's happened with the police headquarters is we had a contractor that we removed. It's now the former contractor. And we've worked with the bonding company, and they've assigned Perini Management to finish the work. It is always a good sign, folks, when the bonding company comes in and sides with the owner. In this case, we're the owner. And they brought in a company to finish the work. So as much as we haven't reported on the costing because it isn't finished, it's not our intention just to say, oh, well, that's a city project. Our intention is to work with the bonding agency and hold those that former contractor responsible, as they ought to be. It's your money, not theirs. And that's exactly how our project management office works. So it's in place, it's full of rigor. You don't often hear about it because it's working, but you need to hear about it on things like Guelph Police Services headquarters. And if Chief Colby was watching tonight, he would say, I can't wait for it to be finished. But the long and the short of it is, they're in there, it's operational. It's not fantastic because there's some things left to do, but we're almost there. But we're looking after your taxpayer, your dollars, and not just saying that, oh, well, that was a contractor. It was the contractor's responsibility to finish it, and the bonding agency and the city, because of that rigorous process, Stephen, is able to step in here and say, we're not on for that nonsense. And that's how we apply that to all of the work, including the future work. You know, Jane did certainly talk about the inflation and supply chain and all those other impacts. That's separate. Those are issues that everybody has to deal with. But the rigor is there for all those future projects. And you've got to do them smartly so that you can jump in at the right time. And if you have to move contractors on, you move them on. You know, we're not firing everybody, but you've got to move them on these big ones. That's why we call them Tier 1s, because they sit elevated from the rest. We put out hundreds of contracts every year. I am sure the vast majority of folks tuning in tonight probably have no idea how many we put out because they go successfully. That's what the rigorous process does. the vast majority go successfully. So it's really good stuff, and a whole bunch of staff doing great work behind the scenes to make it happen on your behalf. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Scott. Tara, earlier on you talked about staffing and the people that's needed, the human resources, the human capital, for lack of a better term, that's needed to move any number of projects, capital projects, even the day-to-day work that happens. You mentioned in the beginning, the curbside waste pickup that happens. That takes people doing jobs day in and day out every day of the week. So this question is a little bit, around that staffing piece. And Trevor, I'm going to come to you on this one. Staffing appears to be a major part of this budget. I think it always is a big part of most budgets. And again, it comes back to what I said. Staff are often the ones that are, carrying out those day-to-day tasks or delivering on those complex capital projects. How does the city decide, and how does council decide through the budget, where staff are needed, where we scale up in terms of staffing, or where changes need to be made, or realignments? And I think for folks that have been watching some of council's discussion, there's been a lot of talk about, capital program and how we resource that capital forecast that Jane talked about. So I'm wondering maybe if you can tie some of that in together and talk about, again, how does the city decide where more staff are needed, or how things get realigned in that regard?
Thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate this question because it is near and dear to my heart, in that every tax dollar that we receive or rate fee that we charge is resources into our organization, and we're responsible for those resources and how we deploy them. And in a very simple term, we deploy them in three ways. We employ staff, we purchase goods, and we purchase services from outside suppliers to reach an end of a project, whether it's a construction project like our CAO, Mr. Stewart, referenced, whether it's a 10-year capital forecast. All of that is the consumption of resources in both labor, goods, and services. So a focus being on labor, I think, is really an honest conversation about how we're best deploying the resources that we garner from the citizens and businesses in the community. It would not be appropriate or responsible for us to be very tight on our labor forces, yet incurring extra additional costs due to overtime or external contractor supplies, when we could actually do it better and more economically, utilizing all of those three levers of our operating focus, being goods, services, and labor. So that is a big part of what our focus is. We went to council in June of this year to have a really good conversation with them about the capital program resourcing strategy. And that was an example of, I think, how we really had an honest conversation with council about ways to think better, to do better, and to deliver better. And in that focus, we transitioned from contract staff to full-time staff, so we had dependency and consistency of individuals working on projects that could see it from start to finish, or certainly a great deal or distance of that time along that journey. Having a revolving door of our staff doesn't serve anyone any benefit, and it really is a focus for us to really embrace and value the single largest asset value we have, which is all of the staff that are committed to serving for the City of Guelph. Another piece to that is workflow, productivity, the development of efficiencies through technology enhancements, the ability for us to look at ways to think outside of traditional delivery models to make the best use of resources. So in some cases, we may be looking to adjust our staffing patterns, not necessarily down, but slow the growth as we embrace technology and digitization and modernization of ways of making us better providers of public services. So all of these factor into what we're doing. And it might also be of concern to some of our staff members that are watching. We value all of our staff members, and we want to make sure there's a place for them. So as we look to embracing our strategic plan and looking at Guelph Future Ready, we talk often as executive team about jobs of yesterday and jobs of tomorrow. So there's an opportunity for us to possibly let go of past practices and activities and embrace new ones as we serve and evolve with the community and the businesses that we serve. So all of these things factor in how we create a budget. But looking at simply a full-time equivalency or staffing level and say that that is an indicator of any kind, it really needs to be partnered with the investment in goods and services and the expenditures that are associated with that. Looking at one indicator in isolation doesn't give you the truest and most real picture. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to demonstrate that in this 22-23 budget as we look forward to really investing and having an honest and serious conversation with council and with the public on how we're deploying their resources. Back to you.
Great, thanks for that, Trevor. I'm going to go to Tara on a question coming up, and this is around service rationalization. So for those that are following council on the regular, or maybe have read some of the stories in Guelph Today, the Mercury, or local news outlets, they may have heard about that service rationalization review. And that work was done, for those that are unaware, was done through some of that provincial funding that I think it was Trevor that mentioned some of the funding that the city received through the provincial government. And KPMG was engaged on that, Tara. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about KPMG's role, the work that they did on that service rationalization review, maybe how it arrived at council. And then I think most importantly, the question that was asked here was, what is being done to implement those things? There was a series of recommendations. How does that fit into the budget? How do those recommendations get contemplated? How are they brought forward to council for council's decision? And so maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the service review rationalization was a council direction from the 2021 budget. And as Stephen mentioned, we engaged with KPMG, and they worked through the spring and with the teams and really put together and did a really in-depth review of all the city services and considered the metrics and did comparison across a number of municipalities to validate the investment that the city is making in those services. And then at the same time, considering where there's opportunities to improve. And so that was really a big focus of the review is what could we do better? Where is there opportunity for budget efficiency, but as well, improvement from a customer service perspective. It's not all about just the savings, but it's about the services that people are receiving from us. And so through the review, we have a list of, I believe it's 56 items that have been identified. There's a top 11 that council has directed us to follow up on, but really on the totality of the list was over about 56 items, I think. And so those are top of mind, I would say, in terms of the work plans leading into 2022, and we're fed into this budget, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I would say the other piece before getting into this budget is that once the service rationalization was over, we were able to leverage the funding that was remaining and start tackling a couple of those recommendations right away. And those are related to the digitization efforts across the city, digital technology plan, as well as really looking a deep look at our customer service practices and where we can start implementing and enhancing those services. We've heard from the community, but we also through that service rationalization know that there's opportunity for improvement. And so that work also occurred through this year and has fed into the 2022 and 2023 capital budget in terms of some of the digital projects that are included in the capital program. So outside of the digital, which we've tackled, there's a number of other opportunities that were listed there. And in terms of how the budget captures those items, staff in a number of those opportunities, they need some resourcing to get more into the specifics, assess the opportunity, validate the review, because they're corporate wide and we need a little bit more information. We need to make smart decisions, and we don't want to just jump into something without really a good assessment of that item. And so through the budget, we did provide a strategy to council that would provide funding from a reserve fund called our Efficiency, Innovation, and Opportunity Reserve Fund that could help provide the resources to do that upfront work over a 3-year period with contributions from each year. And that would give us the funding that would be required to then do that extra work, In some cases, we might need expert advice. In some cases, we need some contractors or temporary people to do the work. I think, the message up here tonight is really about our people, and we all have, our day-to-day jobs, you would say, and everybody does. And so when we get these special projects, in some cases, they can't just be done off the side of a desk. And we talk about, rigor in our project management. I think, number one coming from project management is make sure you have the right people and the right amount of time to do it right the first time. And so that's really what we're asking for in this budget, is to make sure that we have the resources to implement those opportunities the right way. And so once we get through those opportunities, we'll be reporting back annually. Our internal audit function is going to be doing the reporting to council, and at that point then we can report back on the opportunities and the implementation that we've made on all of those items.
Great, thanks, Tara. Very comprehensive answer. The next question is around water, and probably also to a certain degree, Jane, I'm going to come to you, that's the hint, wastewater, stormwater, et cetera. Those are the rate side of the budget. So we pay user rates as residents, and that's sort of what supports those. So the question is this, and it starts with a preamble. Water rates are going up again. We keep getting asked to use less water on a conservation side of things, but our rates keep going up. Shouldn't they be going down if we're using less? And I'm sure there's a whole sustainable infrastructure piece in there, but maybe you can help sort of unpack that for those that are watching online.
Sure, thanks, Stephen. So water and wastewater rates are a little bit different. Of course, they don't come out of our taxes. They are calculated just a little bit differently. The rates that we end up calculating are based or regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act. So that act requires us to make sure that we have enough funding and the plans in place in order to be able to deliver drinking water in a safe manner to our residents. So the way that's done is that our team is forecasting over a long period of time what it would take to maintain that infrastructure in order to be able to deliver safe water. Now, as you know, Guelph is a groundwater source community, so we are very protective of our water, and there are always calls to make sure that we are conserving water, which we should always be doing. The more we conserve, the less wear and tear is going to be on our infrastructure, and the less the cost will be going forward in the future. But the reality is that the costs that it takes to maintain our infrastructure are also going up. So just like with construction costs, the supply chain issues, costs of materials, electricity, all those things go up. So as time goes on and as our infrastructure ages, that ends up costing us more money. So what that ends up translating to is a higher rate for our water and wastewater. So once that we have determined what the cost is going to be able to maintain our infrastructure, to keep within that safe drinking water regulation, that translates into a cost per unit. And those, your water meter actually determines how much you get charged for your water, because it's based on the volume of water that you use. And that also goes for wastewater as well. So a lot of that cost is based on how much it would cost to deliver that water, but the other part of the cost is also on the size of your water service as well. There's a couple of components to it that determine what those rates are going to be. The stormwater, and I know that wasn't specifically in the question, but maybe I'll just address that too. It's a little bit different. The stormwater user fee is based on almost on the same premise, that we are charging what was called an equivalent residential unit, a cost per equivalent residential unit, in order to be able to build up a reserve to look after our stormwater infrastructure. So I'm sure we've all seen and experienced actually differences in our climate, more severe weather events that happen, and also more urbanization of our municipalities. So there's more hard surface for that water to run across, and we have to be able to manage that. And of course, that's more wear and tear on things like our sewer pipes, our bridges, our stormwater ponds, catch basins, things like that. So what Council had approved a few years ago was a 60-cent increase in that we would apply every year, year by year, in order to build up a reserve to make sure that we have enough money to be able to deal with that infrastructure going forward. You can imagine that replacing pipes that have been underground to maintain storms, to look after catch basins, actually it costs quite a bit of money. So we have to make sure that we're building up that reserve in order to be able to pay for that going forward. And we did not include an increase. It has increased by 60 cents per equivalent residential unit, but that's the same increase that we've had for the past 5 years. I know that we are looking throughout the city to see what our process will be to look at our rates going forward, and those stormwater and water rates, if they're going to be looked at again going forward, will be looked at through that process as well. But for the stormwater rate, if we carry on the way that we're going, and nothing else changes in terms of what we have to replace going forward, we expect by that 2033 that we will have sustainable funding in place to be able to look after all of our stormwater infrastructure.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. And I think that sustainable piece is really important, obviously. I mean, we don't need to look, and you alluded to it, you don't need to look much further than, front page news over the last few weeks and the terrible information that's coming out of BC and the flooding and such. And so that sustainable infrastructure funding is really important. We don't go a winter without water main breaks, and that's not for any misgivings on the staff side. It's just old infrastructure in parts of the city, newer infrastructure in other parts of the city, and the need to keep up with that. So thanks for that.
Can I add on to that?
Yeah.
I want to echo what Jane has said, and she nailed it, and her staff nail it. This is one of those areas, the question's a bit of a bugger. I'm using less, but it's going up, and it does feel like it costs more. But this is where it's important for businesses and homeowners. Talk to your insurance folks as well. There is more than just the municipal rate. There's the insurance part. So this is a good engaging exercise across the country. You just highlighted it. Wouldn't a lot of communities love to have a sustainable storm rate in their community because it was well thought out, well in advance, to avoid what's happening and look at the economic impact that happens when the West Coast is closed off, just from the supply chain, let alone the impact that we see every night on our televisions. And so I think there's an ongoing discussion with the insurance industries around storm events and what does that mean. And I think communities that do this storm work well in advance should have a different rate through the insurance sector than communities that don't. So I think there's an equation there for us to push more than just looking at a rate locally, because it feels expensive right in the moment until you live through a major storm. And then it doesn't feel so quite as expensive. 60 cents is a good investment, an additional investment. So I put that out there because I think it's wonderful work happens inside a municipality, of course, but it's the connection to that broader community. And it would be nice to see some of our business sector and homeowners talk with their insurance folks. Why isn't there a rebate? I'll just sort of leave that thought there.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. It highlights how layered the issue is, right? It's not just on the municipal side. There's so many parts of that puzzle. And yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, some time ago, we all witnessed what happened in Toronto. I remember the DVP was flooded. I can't remember how long ago that was. And now, unfortunately, we've got friends and neighbors and countrymen and women in BC that are struggling with this as well. So thanks for that context, Scott. Colleen, I'm going to come to you. This is a question that kind of, it highlights this sort of divide between the service areas and how multiple service areas come to bear on different things that come to fruition. The Ops Campus, it's a capital project. It's certainly something that Jane's well aware of, and her facilities team is working through that, the planning for that. But Colleen, I think a lot of the Ops Campus actually impacts the great team in public services, transit, operations, the folks that clear the roads in the winter and carry out any number of works around the city. So the question is quite straightforward. The Ops Campus seems like a big expense, and I think that's a very fair statement. And the question is this: why can't the city just use those facilities that we have existing for those teams and the services that come from those teams and those facilities, why can't those existing facilities be maintained and used in their current state for teams like the operations team or like the transit team?
Sure. So, I mean, that's another great question, and I'm glad you mentioned that this does cross all of our service areas, because I'll start and I may see if others want to jump in, depending if I miss things. So the operations campus that is being proposed for out on Dunlop Drive, or if you're sort of thinking the corner of Watson Parkway and Stone Road, this is about consolidating a number of city services into one location on lands that the city already owns. And if you sort of think, if you've taken garbage or recycling out to the Waste Resource Innovation Center, that's sort of the approximate location, but there's a lot of land in there that the city owns that's an opportunity for us. So speaking specifically about transit, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be electrifying a significant portion of our transit fleet, and electric buses need to be charged. Our current facilities that we have for transit, we don't have the infrastructure or the capacity there. I think if I'm correct, we can charge one bus at a time at the current location, and so that's obviously not adequate for electrification of a significant portion of our transit fleet. And then when we look at increasing our transit services, that means more buses. We have to purchase more buses, and we don't have the space. So we are at the we're sort of at the maximum of the available space that we have out at our current transit facility. But it isn't just about transit. The operations campus, as I think you mentioned, Stephen, that's about a lot of different departments. And so when you look at operations, or what you think sort of traditionally as our public works department, they operate predominantly out of our location at Municipal Street, and that property has well exceeded its sort of end of life, or what we expected that facility would be able to be usable, and as well size. The city's growing. When we grow, we add more snowplows or other vehicles. We need more space to have the staff, to have the vehicles, and to maintain them. And we're simply out of space at Municipal Street. And so the decision really was, we don't want to keep putting more money into a facility that's at its end of life. We need to invest in a new facility. So the idea that was sort of born out of that was looking at consolidating these services into one location. And what's really key about that is where we can start to see some economies of scale. And so I'll use fleet as an example. We currently have a significant number of mechanics on staff at the city who maintain our fleet vehicles, and that's everything from snowplows to ice resurfaces or Zambonis, to fire trucks, to buses, to the packers that solid waste uses. And we are maintaining those in our fleet shops at 3 different locations. So at Municipal Street, out at Transit, and at Fire Headquarters. And so then part of the model would be to consolidate that into one location, and then we start to see economies of scale where hoists can be shared if needed, or parts and inventory can be consolidated in one location. So it's a much more efficient way of doing it. It is a significant investment, but it's a really important investment as our city grows. And then, as I say, ultimately not to be spending money on these existing facilities that are at or well past their end of life, but instead consolidating it into one location. So I'll sort of turn, because I don't know if Tara wants to jump in and comment probably on, I'm thinking DCs and funding, but I'm just guessing what you might want to jump in on, and then maybe it'll move around the corner if others want to comment.
Sure. So I was actually going to pick up on the piece about the aging infrastructure. A big driver, as you said, about this project is about replacing the aged facilities, especially at Municipal Street, but not just Municipal Street. We also have over the parks operations over Riverside Park. Sorry, thank you. And so when you think about all those buildings, I really wanted to talk about the infrastructure renewal and the focus of our asset management function within the city, and how critical that is, because we're looking out 50 years really, and we look at all of the infrastructure that we own. We've talked about pipes underground. Now we're talking about these large facilities, but it's also about our roads and our bridges and all of the vehicles that you had mentioned, and we need to plan for that. We know that those are going to age, and we have no choice but to continue service delivery. And so rather than get to the point where we would have to replace that facility and and impact the tax levy or impact the rates in 1 year. We take an approach of planning that out 25, 50 years in advance, and we know through our asset management the condition of all these assets. And that's really what that infrastructure renewal strategy is about. And we talk a lot about that at budget, because that is such a critical piece of our financial planning and ensuring that we have the right amount of resources to pay for significant assets when they get to that stage and they have to be replaced. And so at the same time that we're doing that, we're also then looking at the growth, like Colleen had mentioned, and not only just replacing what we have, but thinking about the growth of the community. Like I had mentioned before, we're growing up to over 200,000 people, and the type of equipment that we're going to need, the technology's changing. Equipment's way bigger now than it was back when we originally built those facilities. And so all of those things go into those decisions. And so I don't know if Jane, you have other pieces that you wanted to add.
Well, all those things are absolutely relevant. And I would just add that, we have an opportunity to build a facility that's going to, not for the next 10 years or 20 years, but for the next 50 years. So our city is growing, and as it grows, it has more requirements. And so as we're doing the planning of this facility, there's an opportunity to make sure that it is future ready, to make sure that if we don't build what we need right now, is that in the future, as we go forward, that we can extend that as the city grows. There's also another opportunity that we're going to be building this to a net zero carbon standard. So all those things that Tara had talked about in trying to manage older buildings and how much more that they cost to run, as we go forward, these buildings will be more efficiently operated as we go on.
Great. I don't want to leave anybody out because I feel like that was the question that went around the table. Trevor, do you want to add anything else?
I will, and just briefly, you've heard from my colleagues infrastructure, you've heard about planning for the future. I also want to make sure we sprinkle in a theming that we've heard this evening, and that is our focus on our employees. And we owe it to our employees to provide a safe and appropriate work environment for everyone. Whether you're working within a City Hall location or whether you're working one of our satellite locations, it's best for us to give you all of the environments to do your work safely and properly and most efficient and effective manner that you can. So it's important to keep in check all of those influences that drive decision making that we bring to council.
Yeah, and I think that rings true for me as a staff person as well. I mean, you've got teams that are working together, they're collaborating together, there's efficiencies, there's synergies that can be had, there's, how we manage fleet vehicles and across transit and operations, and I think some of those things, I would imagine, come together in a place like what's being envisioned for the Ops campus. So, yeah, great, and that was obviously the question that sort of got everybody jumping in. Scott, you don't have anything to add, or last chance?
Yeah, the last guy to give the speech is always the guy you cringe at, right? He's fifth in the lowest line, so here I am. So, but I would hope that sort of folks listening tonight, this is how we operate. We're thinking ahead, we're thinking collaboratively, and that's what you want in municipal employees. We should look after our employees because I think you would expect that from your employer, and that's how it ought to work, and that's how it does work. But ultimately, this is good stuff. It's good for the environment. You heard all of that earlier. If we can make our treasurer smile as we spend money and it's good for the environment, that's a win as well. And we need these things. This is a grown municipality. This is overdue. It should have been probably dealt with about a decade ago, quite honestly, because you've heard about the conditions that we've got some of our staff working under. And that's not a woe is me moment. That's just, I think it's exactly what you would expect from any employer our size in this city. But it's been a grown municipality for some time, and you have to service it properly, and you expect it to be serviced properly. And this is how we do it. So this is what a great mid-sized city looks like. All of these things are put into the hopper, and we come up with some terrific plans. And of course, we work with City Council. That's our Board of Governors, and they give us great direction as well. So thanks for including me in that one as well, Mr.
Wouldn't have missed it. The next question we have is, Tara, I'm going to go to you. It's a little bit of a kind of a budget 101. I think it's really good kind of foundational and fundamental information. I'm really glad that the question came in, and it's about revenue, and it sort of feels like a little bit about the building blocks of the budget, what contributes to sort of the revenue that comes in. We've talked a lot about big projects that are ongoing and expenditures inside, but there's another side of the balance sheet on the revenue side, and so this is around that. And the question is this: what is the largest revenue source for the city? And somewhat related, but not explicitly related, how does the city go about increasing user fees? And what maybe more importantly, what goes into the contemplation about user fees that people pay? My kids take swimming lessons, and so I pay user fees. How does the contemplation go around those kind of things?
Great, yeah, thanks, Stephen. So it's a really good question, because I think a lot of people automatically think that property taxes is the only revenue source that we're managing and that we're funding the services from. But property taxes only contributes to about just over 50%, 55% of our total revenue. The other most significant revenue stream are the rates that DCAO Homes had mentioned earlier, including our water, wastewater, and stormwater rates. And so when you think about all of those rates, but then also the user fees, like you mentioned, recreation user fees, there's transit-related fares. There's a number of different solid waste. There's some solid waste related user fees. Almost in every service we have fees. There's building permits and all the planning and application and those types of fees as well. It's actually quite vast, and so we take all of those and we look at all of those together, and they all contribute to cost recovery on the service that we're delivering. And so we're really trying to think about that as a policy decision. What services should have a bit of a user fee or the user pay model versus those that benefit everyone and should be paid for by the property tax. And so that's the balance in terms of the decision making that's going into all of the different user fees and the rates. Parking is another good example where there's fees, and we're moving that towards a fully user pay model as well. And so each year in the budget, we look at the underlying costs. We take a look at then the user fee in terms of how much that should be escalated to keep pace with the underlying cost. And it's really a form of cost recovery. And at the end of the day, then it reduces the amount otherwise required to be levied by property taxes. So that in general is how it works. I will just say the other major stream of revenue that we're managing and that contributes to the cost recovery are development charges, which is really a specific form of revenue that we that's highly legislated, but it's collected and used for the significant capital infrastructure related to the growing community. So we manage the development charges for that. And then other level of government grants. We apply for a great number of grants. We're trying to, leverage our property tax dollars and maybe use that to get matching funding from other levels of government to make our dollars go farther. And so we're always out there and trying to apply to whatever we can to help offset those property tax costs to the community. And then the last thing, beyond the capital grants that we're applying for, there's a great amount of provincial funding that goes into our paramedic services, as well as public health and other related health services that we're getting on an annual basis.
That's great. Thanks, Tara. Scott, I think you wanted to add in on that.
Yeah, if I can, just a little bit, and this will give you a sense of sort of where City Council has us focused as well. And what you're hearing Tara talk about is sort of a benefits received principle. And that's a great place for us to work. I mean, apart from property taxes being regressive and all those other things. But it can also drive actions. Councils are having some pretty good discussions around user fee for parking, you know, if you think about in the downtown versus rates for transit. They can collide a little bit, and it's good to push the edges of comfort to get to those decisions. So I like all of that discussion that City Council's having. But I would suggest this as well. One of the other lenses that we're now starting to put on as municipalities in general, but specifically Guelph, is an equity lens. Because you can deal with user fees, but you've got to have that principle of equity. And so we are now sort of applying that to a lot of these things, so that we can see what that looks like in a municipality. So it's the equity piece of, can you afford it? And there's levels of that, but what does that do, and what decisions does that drive? So, you know, that's the evolution of municipalities, especially in this component of it that we all struggle with on that revenue side, because sometimes it feels like, well, look, we can bump that up, and you could do it if you're driving something, no pun intended, on the parking and the transit piece. Right. But the equity piece is important, because who are you leaving behind? And that's an important distinction for us to make as city staff and city council in terms of community building. So thanks for letting me know that one in.
No, that's a great point, Scott. We got time for a couple more questions. I'll ask one for sure that we've got in, but I'm going to mention to folks again that are watching, we've probably got time after this next question for maybe one or two others. So if you do have questions, now's the time to get those questions in. Again, you can drop your questions into the Vimeo chat if you're using that tool or watching on that tool. If you're on Facebook, you can add some comments in the Facebook section, and I'll read that number again. You can call or text us at 519-831-7340. And so we'll jump right to you, Tara. We've got, again, some time for some final questions. We might get, again, one or two more from the community. But this next question is around surplus. So we've talked about how revenues come in, and at times, and through the budget process, you get to the end of the year and there's a surplus that you're fortunate enough to have. How does that surplus influence the budget? And maybe you can talk, Tara, also about how that surplus is actually applied and used when we get to the end of a budget cycle or the end of a budget year.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. So the surplus, I guess I would first say that we've been managing well over the past number of years, and we have ended in a surplus position in the majority of our business lines. And that has helped when council gets to budget, because they're able to have that financial surplus to fall back on, and it allows them to do more with the reserves and take on more that community investment and that community building through our reserves and these one-time investments. And so I would say, though, however, that we caution, because just as easily as we can have a surplus, we can end in a deficit because of a number of factors. And so really the budget is an estimate, and we're all doing our best to ensure that we're delivering the services within that estimate. But there are things that are out of our control that happen. And this group on the stage tonight is really managing that at a holistic perspective, so that if there's impacts in one area, we're offsetting it in others. And so in terms of what it does for the budget, it enables council then to have an understanding of where we're going through the year. I mean, we're not done the year yet, and so we can only project what that surplus or deficit might be. And then that just gives council that little bit of extra understanding and maybe ability to utilize those funds to help maybe phase in budget impacts over a longer period of time, or to use that money as a one-time special item in the upcoming years. So that's in general how we manage and recommend that council uses any of those surplus monies.
Great, thanks, Tara. We do have one final question. I'm going to go to this question, and then I'll come back to Tara sort of at the end, maybe to help us wrap up before I offer some final comments as well. But Scott, I'm going to go to you on this next one. The hospital funding and the hospital building fund. So Tara mentioned a little bit about that in her intro and her opening comments about the hospital funding. And the question is this: will the city still be contributing to the hospital building fund, even though, as we've talked about throughout tonight, that finances are tight. We've come through a pandemic, and I think council will have a decision to make at that juncture as well, as they did last year, but maybe you can offer some thoughts.
Thank you for that one. So the simple answer is yes. Council have committed to $750,000 for 6 years, and this is year 2. And so that's a significant investment that they want to make on behalf of you to contribute to our local hospital, and it's a great thing for them to do. But I would say this as well. This is a provincial responsibility. It doesn't matter the government that's in the province, because they've made this change a number of years ago, where they've been able to sort of move this off to local fundraising and local raising of taxes to fund a hospital, and that's not the way to do it. And so the hospital should get built. We need our hospital dealt with. However, doing it this way, and that's happening across the province, what happens if you're a community that can't afford to fundraise? And so that's the problem with it. That's why we pay provincial taxes as well. So that's a bit of a soapbox. I hope I'm not making any of our provincial colleagues too angry, but I think that's a responsibility that's been moved to sort of locally over the last, I'm going to say 15 years. So it's not a new thing. It's just unfortunate then it gets put onto sort of a city council to step into that space. And $750,000 in the scheme of our budget, but it's 0.29% this year on that budget. So where else could that 0.29% go to the things that we've got absolute responsibility for? And you could argue, well, you've got responsibility for the hospital because sometimes we're all going to use the hospital. You might be born there, or you have to take somebody there. So you want a hospital that's viable and does all the things locally. So we support that. But I think also there's a place for it not to be moved and forcing hospitals to do fundraising. What if it was just funded? And maybe that's just a naive dream of mine. But to answer that specific question, City Council is committed to this. They said they would do it. They're going to do it. They're in lockstep with the hospital construction. And that's why there was a pause last year, and this is why we're into year 2 this year, to make sure that that money flows when our good folks at the hospital need it, and that investment is there for them on your behalf.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Scott. We are running out of time. Tara, I'm going to go to you. One last comment from you. You got sort of 30 seconds to a minute before we've got to shut things down. But maybe you want to talk about this council, previous councils have worked really hard to get the city in the financial position that it is. I know you're quite proud of things like our credit rating and such like that, and that is mentioned regularly. I think that's a really important piece. But maybe you want to talk about the position that Guelph is in, in tight times, but relatively speaking, being able to go into a budget in probably an enviable position in comparison to maybe some other communities. And so maybe I'll just turn it to you to sort of wrap some things up, some final comments, and then I'll finish off as well.
Sure, thanks. So I would say that we are proud of where we've come, and it's a group effort. But it's about long-term planning. And we've taken that long-term approach to how we recommend policy to council and in everything that we do. And I've talked a bit about infrastructure renewal and all of the pieces, and that all goes into it. And I would say that we are in a strong financial position for that reason. And what that's allowed us to do is, like Stephen, you mentioned, we maintain a AA+ credit rating. And for a city our size, that is a really great rating. And that allows us to access debt at a really low cost. And we were successful in doing that this year. We issued just under $50 million earlier this year. And that debt is how we pay for significant capital investment as well. And so it also has enabled us to, now we're in this period of economic uncertainty, it's allowed us to take on a little bit more risk in terms of the budget that's proposed by utilizing those reserves that we've built up over time, over the last 5 years. And so we've really been able to, rather than having to raise taxes or feel the impact of increasing insurance prices and increasing contractual obligations and the inflation that's been talked about tonight, we're able to use our reserves and help us spread that out over the next 4 years. And that's what you're seeing in the budget. And that is an enviable position, I believe, that not all municipalities will have the ability to do. And so I think that for that reason, you know, we as staff, we've definitely recognized, you know, the current economic conditions, and we've addressed that as much as we can. And so yeah, I think in terms of being proud of our city and the financial position and our budget, I think we've done a really good job with what's been presented, and it's a good solid package.
Great. Thanks, Tara. Well, everybody, that's it for tonight. That's all the time we have. We've run out of time. I want to thank everybody that's been watching from home and for all the questions that you sent in. It is really, it's been a great evening. It's been a good evening for discussion and dialogue, and I think that's really important. Thank you to the panelists that have joined us tonight and for all the insight and answers to questions you offered. I really want to say a special thanks to the folks here at the River Run Center. There's folks behind the cameras that are making this happen and making the magic come to life. We're really excited that shows are going to begin here again and that this facility is opening up once again. It is really a jewel in the city. Again, I'll say to everybody, if there's any questions that we didn't get to tonight, we will be sure to share those responses on our website at guelph.ca. And they'll be on guelph.ca/budget under the Get Involved section. And if you think of a question after we sign off, please do continue to reach out. budget@guelph.ca via email is a great way to do that. The next step for everyone's awareness in this whole process is Council's approval and discussion of the budget on December 2nd. That meeting gets started at 1:30 p.m. on December 2nd, and you can watch that live on guelph.ca/live. So once again, thanks to everybody, thanks to the panelists, thanks to the folks here at the River Run Center, and thanks to you for tuning in and your questions. Good night.
Dwelling in your sadness to see her way out from here is more than just a daily hardship. It comes like a wave, it grows, feels as though we're drowning in every thought we know, with fear ever more resounding. When you feel there's nothing you can do and living leads you to dismay, and you're tempted to believe in all that you're better off this way, nothing could be further from the truth. Believe me when I say that there will be brighter days. No one ever said it was easy for things to work out right. Know that I will always be there for you in these dark nights. No one ever said it was easy for you to find your way. No, you're not alone. Together we can face a new day. When you feel there's nothing you can do and living leads you to dismay, and you're tempted to believe in all that you were better off this way, nothing could be further from the truth. Believe me when I say that I'll be there to help you on your way to all these brighter days. The words I use aren't forgiving. Too many times, please forgive me. Tired hearts can't always sing. And if you've heard my insisting too many times, please forgive me. Tired hearts can't do so many things. All this sweat that beats my brow, all these things I don't know how to bring me to what I really need. There's a place I've been missing where we can forget our misgivings. So leave me be on these shores and you will see this little river is where I need to be. With all I do in persisting in modern life, please forgive me. Weary minds seek greater things. Leave behind all your worries. Recall what makes life worth living. Loving hearts have greater needs. All this sweat that beats my brow, all these things I don't know how to bring me to what I really need. There's a place I've been missing where we can forget our misgivings. So leave me be on these shores and you will see this little river is where I need to be. Hopes and dreams need time to be complete, where we can see the sunset through the trees and the sky can gleam on endlessly. Oh, there's a place I've been missing where we can forget our misgivings. So leave me be on these shores and you will see our place for love, our place for family. This little river is where I need to be. Day to day can often seem just a series of pointless meetings.